Hi guys, welcome to my house. This is one of the ideas I had for how we can incorporate technology more into the course. I've posted a few announcements in there, but it doesn't seem like everyone was reading them. And I'm like you, I don't like reading a ton of text, so maybe if we do video reviews, more people will watch them instead of actually just going through and reading the text. For anyone who's wondering, this is Elvis, this is my dog. Somebody requested in their Get to Know Me that they see more dogs throughout the course, so this is my attempt to make you happy. And what this is going to be is I'm going to go really fast through the PowerPoints we've done. And so it'll just be a quick review, and I'll talk more about why once we kind of get into them. All right? We'll see you there. All right, so here's the deal. We've got our discussion thread right here. If you can't get there, you just go to the Canvas page, click the discussion tab on the left, and then go to the Unit 1 essay or test questions. So far, only 3 questions have been asked. And this is part of why I was hesitant to make this video until today, because either no one needs help, which is a good thing, and if no one needs help, then I don't need to make the video, or none of you have started yet, and that's obviously a bad thing. And so I don't want to make the video and put all my time and effort into this if you're not putting effort into the course. But what I ultimately decided is that we're going to go ahead and try this, at least for this test, and see how it goes, because there were some people that missed class for various reasons that were definitely excused, and I understand that. And so I don't want to inhibit your learning just because I won't make a video and put some extra time in. So here we go. We're going to run through this really quick and just hit the highlights. The rest of it, I hope you can get from the PowerPoints or get from someone else's notes, but off we go. So information processing theory, it all starts with your sensory registers. Your sensory registers are just your 5 senses. And so if you talk about your senses, the first thing we need to talk about is attention, right? Our attention goes 2 different ways. We either have automatic attention or selective attention. Automatic, we have no control over. It just happens. If someone makes a really loud bang, if I were to slam on this table right now, which I won't, you would probably attend to that without even thinking about it. Selective attention is actually choosing to ignore other stimuli and pay attention to whatever you need to focus on. All right? There are a lot of things that affect our attention, and here's a list of them. You can go through them on your own. Great. Let's move on to perception. So perception, that hopefully you understand before you had to take this class, but really all it is your past experiences affecting what you believe and predict for future ones. So if we go to these 2 pictures, a lot of people would say that the girl here is very angry at the guy because we've had past experiences of that pose and that posture and that proximity to each other being portrayed in movies and being portrayed in real life arguments as her being angry at him. But we actually have no context for what's going on here. So it could be, as some people have said before, that the girl is really frustrated with her earring because that earring doesn't look like it's attached to her earlobe. But until we actually have the context, everything we say about this picture is actually just perception. Same thing down here. This is actually from a picture from The Bachelorette. And if you know the show, you know the context, and it all makes sense. But if you don't know what's going on, you see these 2 ESPN guys who probably have nothing to do with this guy and this girl. That ring is a monstrous size, so clearly this is a gimmick. But until we actually have the context, we don't really understand fully. And so everything that we say about this picture actually goes back to our perception. All right, and here's a short little caveat. Sorry that cut so fast, but I need to go back to the sensory registers and talk about this infinite capacity but short duration. When we say infinite capacity, it's because when we sense something, we actually don't know how much we sense. Like if I look through my eyes, I can technically see everything through my peripheral vision all the way to what's right in front of me. But I can't actually quantify that, so that's why it's infinite. And when we talk about short duration, we're talking extremely short duration. Like I have half a second to almost a max of 3 seconds to either attend to something, which means we give it our attention and then we give it perception, or else it decays and we don't pay attention to it. All right? So now let's move on to our second set of slides, where we get into the working memory. So the working memory, in contrast, can hold about 7 pieces of information, and it can last about 20 seconds. All right, now that's in contrast to our sensory memory, which is almost instantaneous, right? Half a second to 3 seconds. And this is where everything that we actually think about takes place. It all goes into our working memory, which is limited, right? Now, the way we make information stay in our working memory is through this concept of maintenance rehearsal. And all that is when we say it to ourselves over and over and over again, like when we're trying to memorize a phone number or when we're trying to memorize vocab words. But it doesn't have to just be repeating things to ourselves. It can be intentionally thinking about something constantly. So when you're writing a paper, you're constantly thinking through the thoughts and the paragraphs and the themes that you need to put into that paper. That keeps it in your working memory. That's part of rehearsal as well. It doesn't have to just be repeating numbers or a list like all of these slides have us doing. Going back up here to chunking. Chunking is where we take more than the 7 things that we can remember, and we actually group them into things that are familiar to us. And it actually makes the process of remembering things easier. For instance, when we have this list of 10 numbers here, we shouldn't actually be able to remember that because we can only remember an average of 7. But whenever we see 10 numbers, we typically think of it like a phone number, right? And this becomes very easy because the area code 864 almost becomes automatic. We don't have to think about it. And so it frees up some processing space in our minds, because now instead of saying 864 as 3 separate items in our working memory, 864 just becomes the Anderson-Clemson area code, which is actually just one item in our memory, and it frees it up a lot easier. So chunking here can be a lot easier if we know how to group things, but down here it actually gets a lot harder because these things can't be chunked very easily. But we can use chunking, and we naturally use chunking whenever possible, and it makes it easier on ourselves. All right, going down to multitasking. As much as you think you can multitask, I try to multitask all the time, but what you're actually doing is switching back and forth. Multitasking isn't actually possible. Our brains can only actually think about one thing at a time, but we switch back and forth so fast that we might not notice. But what it does is it wastes time and we lose focus. All right, cognitive load. This is one of the big things of this whole course. It's something we'll talk about over and over again. Cognitive load is a more difficult concept, complex concept, but what it is there's extraneous load, intrinsic load, and germane load. Extraneous just means it's extra. Not that it's extra in difficulty, but it's extra that we don't need it. For instance, I don't need any distractions when I'm taking a test, because if I have distractions, now my mind is thinking about those distractions or trying to block out those distractions while also trying to focus on the test. But we have a limited processing space. We have a limited working memory. So anything that I divert to work on extraneous load actually takes away from what I can devote to the germane load and the intrinsic load. Okay, so this is any type of distraction, even internal distractions, like if you're hungry or sleepy. Then if we get to intrinsic load, this is the load that has to do with the task itself. So this example here hopefully is pretty self-explanatory. 2 plus 2 is a very easy problem, whereas a word problem in math is much harder. And so we'll get to some more examples of intrinsic load further down. But for now, we will move on to germane load. That's the one we want to maximize. That's the one we actually want. That's the good one. The one that we actually use to think about whatever the task is, whatever the process is that we're trying to learn. If we have this maximized, we learn it the fastest, or we complete the task the fastest. Okay? So this is a diagram showing we want to minimize the extraneous, minimize the red, have a little bit of intrinsic load, because we don't want to teach things that are so easy that kids don't have to think about it. We don't want to make it so hard that they can't even start. And then we want the most amount of germane load, because that's what's dedicated to learning. So if we go through these examples, this first one, it won't necessarily play unless you're in the actual PowerPoint slideshow, but this first one is 2 parts. It's got this whole text base here that describes this diagram. And if you look in a textbook, this is what you'd typically see. You'd see a paragraph or more that describes a diagram, and you're expected to learn from that. Whereas this one, this second one, if you actually have it in the slideshow, what it'll do is it'll play the audio while this diagram is moving. And the reason why this second one is easier than these two is because here you have to flip back and forth between these two to actually figure out what's going on. This actually has a harder intrinsic load because you're forcing the user to do a lot more with the task. Whereas this one, I can watch the video and listen at the same time. And the actual task of learning what's going on with this tornado is easier in the second one because I don't have to try so hard to wrap my head around the material. Hopefully that helps. Going to this geometry one, this is another example where the intrinsic load is very different. So we have this first question. This is what you would typically see on a textbook or on a standardized test. And then we have this example down here. Same information, it's just in this one, the user, the student has to actually lay out where all those angles go. In this one, it's already done for you. So if we're trying to teach that vertically opposite angles are equal, and a student messes up the placement for some of these angles, he'll get the entire concept wrong. Whereas down here, if it's already placed and we're still trying to teach that vertically opposite angles are equal, now the student doesn't have a chance to mess up the placement for where these go. And it actually makes less of an intrinsic load because here the task itself is harder. It's harder because I actually have to do extra steps to place these. Whereas here the task is easier because I'm actually able to just focus on the task that vertically opposite angles are equal. Hopefully that helps. If it doesn't help, shoot me a question in the discussion forum or ask a friend. Okay? All right, let's move on to part 3. So part 3, this is where we get into long-term memory. Okay? And if you were there on Thursday, we went through these last 2 slides fast, and that's okay because there's not going to be a ton of specifics about part 4 on the test because I don't really like part 4. Okay, so let's talk about long-term memory because this is important. When we store things to our long-term memory, right, we have to store it as some sort of knowledge, and so we have 3 different types of knowledge. This first one, it says explicit or declarative knowledge. What you're going to see on the test is only declarative, okay? Explicit is one way to put it, but the test will only say declarative. And what that is it's divided into 2 parts, semantic and episodic. Now, semantic is facts, rules, strategies. That's like saying, I know that I have to drive on the right side of the road. That's semantic knowledge. That's just a fact. I know the sky is blue. Episodic knowledge is saying that you know what happened yesterday to yourself. You know what you ate for breakfast yesterday because you lived it, right? You have memories of actually completing something. Semantic knowledge is just a fact. Episodic knowledge is like a TV episode replaying in your head. Okay? Moving on, we have procedural knowledge. That's knowing how to do something. That's something that has steps that you know how to do, such as tying your shoes, driving a car, building a set of shelves, okay? Cooking a recipe. Those are all procedures that if you know how to do them, that becomes procedural knowledge. All right. Now, procedural knowledge, it always starts with declarative knowledge because it starts out as this. It starts out as semantic or episodic, right? I know how to cook, let's say, pancakes. I know how to make pancakes because I've seen it before. I've had a personal experience with my mom making pancakes or with my grandparents making pancakes, right? And then as I practice making pancakes, I get more episodic knowledge, which eventually turns into procedural knowledge. Eventually, I know how to do it. And so procedural knowledge is almost like building upon all of my declarative knowledge to make a step-by-step process. All right, and then this is metacognitive knowledge. This is the most abstract one. It's the one that no one else can tell you about. It's how much do you know? And the only person who can tell you that is you. So for those of you who are last minute studying for this test, maybe last minute watching this video, I'm hoping that your metacognitive knowledge told you that you know enough about this test that you didn't really need to study for it. The alternative is that you had other things to do that you held in greater priority. That has nothing to do with metacognitive knowledge. Metacognitive knowledge is essentially knowing yourself. What are your capabilities? How do you learn best? How do you end up knowing when you know something sufficiently? Okay, it's very abstract, and I can't actually remember if there's a question on the test about it, but just know that this is the one that no one else can tell you. You have to know it about yourself. Okay? So let's move on to schema. So a schema, it's like a box. This is how we hold information in our brains. It's like if I had a filing cabinet, right? In a school, you have filing cabinets on every single student. A computer stores things in folders. Our mind does the same thing. So if I'm going, the example below is going to be going to a wedding. If I'm going to a wedding, I pull out this box that has all of my information about weddings, all of the weddings that I've been to, all the weddings I've seen on TV, and I create a schema, is what it's called. I create a schema about weddings. Okay, and so I can imagine that the wedding dress would be white. I can imagine there will be a reception, that there will be food, that there will be real flowers, not fake flowers like we have in Indiana. And all of these things coming together is called my script for a wedding. My script, my schema for a wedding. And it's essentially me pulling out my box and pulling out everything that I know about weddings, and it helps me predict what I should expect when I go to my next wedding. And so then we get into this issue of self-constructed theories, right? Because we all do this. We take our schema, our scripts, and all of our knowledge from before, from our experiences, and we try to predict what we expect will happen. So it's like when I go to my next wedding, I predict a lot of different things about it. Okay? Now, all of these predictions could be completely wrong. And so this is a really good example down here about having a wrong self-constructed theory, right? We see that when people wear glasses to do intelligent things like read or do their homework, when we're little kids, we see glasses and we start thinking, oh, they must put those glasses on because it makes them smart, right? And parents and other kids make jokes about people who wear glasses are smarter. And so little kids make this misconstrued and incorrect self-constructed theory that glasses actually make you smart, okay? And it's self-constructed because no one has told you that the glasses are making people smart. It's something that you start thinking about on your own. And eventually, as we experience more, we figure out that that's actually incorrect, okay? So if we are really learning, our schema should be always changing. And it changes through adaptation, but specifically, it changes through assimilation and accommodation. So assimilation is when we add things to our pre-existing knowledge. That's when I take out my box about weddings and I add more to my box. So if we look at this cow example, I have these 3 things that I know about a cow, right? And I can also assume from this picture that cows must also be black and white. But when I see a brown cow for the first time, I look at my mom and I say, hey, is that a cow? And she says, yep. And I'm like, okay, well, that must mean that cows can be brown and black and white. And so in my box about cows, I now put that a cow can be brown or black and white. And it has been assimilated into the same box. All right. Now that's different from accommodation, because accommodation means that the new information I have can't go in that box. And so I have to create a new box. I have to create a new schema. So if I look back at my cow, same 3 things, but if this time I see a dog that has the same attributes as the cow, big ears, 4 legs, and a tail, and this one's even black and white, I look at my mom and I say, is that a cow? And she says, no, of course that's not a cow. Haven't you seen a dog before? And I say, okay, so that's a dog. And so what happens is I have to accommodate this information. I can't put dog in my box about cows because they're 2 different things. I've just been told that they're different. And so what happens is first I have to admit I'm wrong. If I don't admit I'm wrong, I can't accommodate. So I have to admit I'm wrong, and then I have to create a new box that says dogs. I have to have a box about cows, and now I have a box about dogs. And what happens is eventually I start assimilating new information into those separate boxes, right? So into my cow box, I start putting that it eats grass, that it moves, that it has an udder, that it's bigger. And in my dog box, I put that it eats dog food or that it eats meat. It barks, and they're more domesticated inside. I've never seen an indoor cow before. And so eventually I don't have to try so hard to separate those boxes because they get enough new information assimilated or added to them that it's easier to separate. Okay? Now, let's jump into this last PowerPoint slide, these last PowerPoint slides. We're going to talk about encoding, retrieval, and decay. And this is going to be the fastest. We're going to skip a lot of things because there are some things that I don't think they do very well in here. Okay? One of the good things they do is this concept of meaningful learning, right? We want to hook things to prior knowledge. You don't need to know the word hook. What you need to know is that we want to connect things to prior knowledge, because if I connect to prior knowledge, it means I'm pulling out boxes that kids already have and I'm adding to them, or I'm challenging them to make new ones. It's like if I taught my math lesson on multiplication without talking about it in the concept of multiplying apples or oranges. That's how we teach first graders addition, and that's how we work with basic number sense. And if we don't do that, kids just make a box that says math on it, and they only pull that box out when they're doing math. When really we want kids to pull out math facts when they think about food, when they think about money, when they think about business, okay? So meaningful learning, very important. We always want to connect as much as we can to prior knowledge. All right, organization. This one's pretty simple. If I give you this long list of words, it's really hard for you to remember because there's 20 words and they don't really connect. But as you read through the words, you see that they can organize into 4 separate groups of 5. And this actually makes it much easier to remember because now I've got a group of vegetables, a group of clothes, a group of professions, and a group of utensils, right? You might not remember them exactly, but it's still easier to remember than this up here. And that's organization. We want to give organization to our students at the beginning and not at the end, but whether or not it's at the beginning or the end, giving organization is helpful no matter what. That's why we give syllabi, and that's why we give programs. Okay, visual imagery. This one, you honestly don't really need to worry about a lot. We didn't talk about it a lot. The only thing that I like about visual imagery is that we remember a lot more from a picture, right? But that's not really in the slides that I was given, so we're not going to worry about it. Peg words you don't need to worry about. Going to elaboration. This one we will talk about. Okay, elaboration is going beyond the minimum, right? This says adding additional ideas. If we can add concepts to what students need to know, it helps them remember, because especially if they came up with the ideas on their own, right? And so some ways that we can do elaboration are analogies, which is where we do this all the time in class, where we give anecdotes. We talk about our experiences at weddings to start talking about schemas, right? Or the analogy of comparing something to something else that's already known, right? Connecting it to prior knowledge. Elaboration is a good thing. The other thing with elaboration is mnemonics, which hopefully are pretty self-explanatory. Things like FACE, we have a slide on that coming up. But let's talk about analogies a little bit more, right? This is a pretty good analogy trying to describe Instagram or Snapchat to someone who doesn't know. A lot of times you'll say it's like texting. Snapchat is like texting, but it goes away, or sending a picture that goes away. Or if they know Instagram but don't know Snapchat, you can say it's like Instagram that's temporary, right? Instagram, it's like Facebook but only for pictures, okay? Whenever we say that, we're saying it's like, that's a comparison. We're comparing the unknown of Instagram or Snapchat to what we do know, texting, Facebook, all right? Mnemonics, that's like FACE. Here it says rice. And acrostics, that's every good boy does fine if you need the lines on the treble clef. Hopefully we don't have to cover too much about mnemonics, but I do believe there's a question about it on the test. Okay, going into retrieval. Retrieval cues, this is really just, it's like when you can't remember something and then suddenly something tips you off about it. So if I can't remember your name, but then you start talking and you have an accent, and then all of a sudden I remember you because of your accent, that's a retrieval cue. And this one, hopefully pretty self-explanatory. Let's keep going. Oh, here we go. What do we retrieve? We retrieve a reconstruction, and what that means is our memories are flawed, right? I can't remember anything perfectly because I'm a limited person. And so even if you were to close your eyes right now and describe the room you're in, there are things that you're not going to remember. There are things you will definitely get wrong. Something's going to be out of place. And it doesn't matter how familiar you are with it because it's always a reconstruction. Okay? And you can do this activity with yourself, trying to remember exactly what it is. And no matter how vivid and how impactful we think of that memory, something always goes wrong. We can't ever remember anything perfectly. And so that matters because if you've ever tried to have a conversation where two people are telling the same story and they don't get the same facts, they don't get their facts straight, one person says, I never actually said that, or that didn't happen this time, it happened later, right? That's all because we retrieve different reconstructions. And that's how we get in a lot of fights with our roommates, right? We think one person did something when really they didn't, and it's all a misconception because we retrieve a reconstruction. All right, let's talk about decay. So decay, you can go through this pretty quickly on your own, but there's failure to retrieve. This is where it just doesn't come to us, right? We just can't think of it. It's on the tip of our tongue, never comes out. Reconstruction error, this is the whole arguing over two different stories. Interference, this is when something gets in the way of us remembering. So I start walking to my living room and all of a sudden I get a text message. I check my text message, finish walking to the living room, and all of a sudden I don't remember why I came to the living room in the first place. If something gets in the way of us remembering, that's called interference. Decay just means we don't use it. And then here, confirmation bias, this is another concept that we're going to talk about throughout the whole course. And this is us choosing to either ignore new information because it doesn't agree with us, or twisting information that might be neutral so that it supports us. And the big example that I used in class is the election, right? No matter who you voted for, you could get the same statistic about Trump or Hillary, and you would see certain news channels or certain newspapers broadcast that statistic one way in support of whatever political party they wanted, or they would twist it the other way. And that's all confirmation bias. And we all do it all the time. And even though we say we're intellectuals and we're above bias, we're actually really bad at it. And so we'll point that out throughout more of class. And that's it. That's Unit 1, hopefully thrown into about a 20-minute video. If you watched it, great. Hopefully it was really helpful. If not, send me some feedback and we'll see how we can improve it throughout the course. All right? See you guys tomorrow. Hopefully this was good. Bye.